Greetings. Welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing climate change, abrupt climate change, and things adjacent. And today, Labor Day 2019. Hope you all are having a good one, whatever you're doing, wherever you're at. And this is going to be a one article video. This is a very long article. I read through it and I liked it, and gosh darn it, I cannot remember who sent it to me. So I apologize. I can't give credit for who sent me this article. I'm sure you will make yourself known, hopefully in the comments. This is an old article from 2009, but everything in this article is extremely pertinent to right now. So the date doesn't really matter. It all sounds like what's happening right now, so there's nothing really dated about the information in the article. And as far as things have progressed in this article, things have only progressed much, much more in the last 10 years. So I'm going to read this. This is from Grist, called The Fallacy of Climate Activism by Adam Sachs, August 24th, 2009. In the 20 years since we climate activists began our work in earnest, the state of the climate has become dramatically worse, and the change is accelerating. This despite all of our best efforts. Clearly, something is deeply wrong with this picture. What is it that we do not yet know? What do we have to think and do differently to arrive at urgently different outcomes? The answers lie not with science, but with culture. Climate activists are obsessed with greenhouse gas emissions and concentrations. Since global climate disruption is an effect of greenhouse gases and a disastrous one, this is understandable, but it is also a mistake. Such is the fallacy of climate activism. We insist that global warming is merely a consequence of greenhouse gas emissions. Since it is not, we fail to tell the truth to the public. I think there are two serious errors in our perspectives on greenhouse gases. Global warming as symptom. And he's going to get a little into the cultural cause. But this is super important, and I have talked about this in the past, that we are programmed culturally to live this way. So we almost, all of us, every single one of us, need to be deprogrammed from global capitalistic industrial civilization. The first error is our failure to understand that greenhouse gases are not a cause but a symptom, and addressing the symptom will do little but leave us with a devil's sack full of many other symptoms, possibly somewhat less rapidly lethal, but lethal nonetheless. The root cause, the source of the symptoms, is 300 years of our relentlessly exploitive, extractive, and exponentially growing technoculture, against the background of 10 millennia of hierarchical and colonial civilizations. This should be no newsflash, but the seductive promise of endless growth has grasped all of us civilized folk by the collective throat. Led us to expand our population and numbers beyond all reason, and to commit genocide to indigenous cultures and destruction of other life on Earth. To be sure, global climate disruption is the number one symptom, but if planetary warming were to vanish tomorrow, we would still be left with ample catastrophic potential to extinguish many life forms in fairly short order. Deforestation, desertification, poisoning of soil, water, air, habitat destruction, overfishing, and general decimation of oceans, nuclear waste, depleted uranium, and nuclear weaponry, to name just a few. While these symptoms exist independently, many are intensified by global warming. We will not change course by addressing each of these as separate issues. We have to address root cultural cause. Beyond greenhouse gas emissions, the second error is our stubborn unwillingness to understand that the battle against greenhouse gas emissions, as we have currently framed it, is over. It is absolutely over, and we have lost. We have to say so. This is amazing. Amazing that this is said in 2009, because there weren't a lot of people saying this exact message in 2009, save maybe Guy McPherson and maybe, Michael Rubert. I can only think of a couple. we have to say so. There are three primary components of escalating greenhouse gas concentrations that are out of our control. 30-year lag. The first is that, generally speaking, the effects we are seeing today, as dire as they are the result of atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide in the range of only 330 parts per million. So the damage that we were seeing in 2009 was the damage inflicted by 330 parts per million of CO2 in the air. And where are we now? We're very, very close to 430. 430. Not the result of today's concentrations of almost 390. That was back then. This is primarily a consequence of the vast inertial mass of the oceans, which absorb temperature and carbon dioxide and created a roughly 30-year lag between greenhouse gas emissions and their effects. We are currently seeing the effects of greenhouse gases emitted before 1980. Just as the scientific community hadn't realized how rapidly and extensively geophysical and biological systems would respond to increases in atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations, we currently have only a rough idea of what that 60 parts per million already emitted will mean. Even if we stopped our emissions today, and so if there's a 30-year lag, what was emitted... So we're seeing now what was emitted in the 1990s, right? We currently have only a rough idea of what the 60 parts per million already emitted will mean, even if we stopped our emissions today. But we do know with virtual certainty that it will be full of unpleasant surprises. Positive feedback loops, the second out-of-control component in positive amplifying feedback loops, The odd thing about positive feedbacks is that they are often ignored in assessing the effects of greenhouse gas emissions. Our understanding of them is limited, and our ability to insert them into an equation is rudimentary. Our inability to grasp them, however, in no way mitigates their effects, which are as real as worldwide violent weather. It is now clear that several phenomena are self-sustaining, amplifying cycles. For example, melting ice and glaciers, melting tundra, and other methane sources, and increasing ocean saturation with carbon dioxide, which leads to increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide. These feedbacks will continue even if we reduce our human emissions to zero. And all of our squiggly light bulbs, Priuses, wind turbines, Waxman Markeys, and Copenhagens won't make one bit of difference. Not that we shouldn't stop all greenhouse gas emissions immediately. Of course we should, but that's only a necessity, not nearly a sufficient response. And we need to find the courage to say so. Nonlinearity. The third component is nonlinearity, which means that the effects of rising temperature and atmospheric carbon concentrations may change suddenly and unpredictably. While we may assume linearity for natural phenomena, because linearity is much easier to assess and to predict, many changes in nature are non-linear, often abruptly so. A common example is the behavior of water. The changes of state of water, solid, liquid, gas, happen abruptly. It freezes suddenly at 0 C, not at 1 C, and it turns to steam at 100 C, not at 99. If we were to limit our experience of water to the range of 1 to 99 C, we would never know of the existence of ice or steam. This is where we stand in relationship to many aspects of global climate. We don't know where the tipping points, effectively the changes of state, are from such events as irreversible melting of glaciers, release of trapped methane from tundras and seabeds, carbon saturation of the oceans. Difficult to pin down, tipping points may be long past or just around the corner. As leading climatologist Jim Hansen has written, present knowledge does not permit accurate specification of the dangerous level of human-made GHGs. However, it is much lower than has commonly been assumed. If we have not already passed the dangerous level, the energy infrastructure in place ensures that we will pass it within several decades. Evidence of nonlinearity is strong, not only from the stunning acceleration of climate change in just the past couple of years, but from the wild behavior of the climate over millions of years, which sometimes change dramatically within periods as short as a decade. The most expert scientific investigators have been blindsided by the velocity and extent of recent developments. Even back then, in 2009, whoa, how could this happen? We didn't even see this coming. Bobbity boop. Where are we at? Blindsided by the velocity and extent of recent developments in the climate models have likewise proved far more conservative than nature itself. Given that scientists have underestimated impacts of even small changes in global temperature, it is understandably difficult to elicit an appropriate public and governmental response. Beyond the box. We climate activists have to tread on uncertain ground and rapidly move beyond our current unpleasant but comfortable parts per million box. Here are some things we need to say over and over again everywhere in 1,000 different ways. Bitter climate truths are fundamentally bitter cultural truths. Endless growth is an impossibility in the physical world. Ding, ding, ding. Impossible. We cannot have more consumption, and we absolutely cannot have more humans, and we won't. We won't make it to 10 billion. And all the articles and all the studies and all of the projections of what are we going to do when there's 10 billion people? We're not going to have to worry about feeding 10 billion people. There will not be. Somewhere in the as we come up on 8 billion, somewhere between 8 and 9 is when we're going to have a lot of people, rapid degrowth of the human population. In other words, lots of people dying. There's just no way we make it to 10 billion. Bitter climate truths are fundamentally cultural truths. Endless growth is an impossibility in the physical world, always ending in overshot and collapse. Collapse with a bang or a whimper, most likely both. We are already witnessing it, whether we choose to acknowledge it or not. Because of this civilization's obsession with growth, its demise is 100% predictable. We simply cannot go on living this way. Our version of life on Earth has come to an end. Moreover, there are no free market or economic solutions, and since corporations must have physically impossible endless growth in order to survive, corporate social responsibility is a myth, a fallacy. The only socially responsible act that corporations can take is to dissolve, which makes me actually feel kind of good about my retort when some mucky muck. I got to have a conversation with somebody who was going to speak at the Little Davos to a bunch of billionaires, corporate movers and shakers. And, she was going to speak to them about climate change. And she was like, well, what do you want me to tell them? And I told her to tell them just this thing. Take your money, pack it in, and go the fuck away. That's the best thing you can do. That's the most socially responsible thing that corporations and billionaires can do. Take your fucking money and pack it up, close it down, close up shop, and go the fuck away. And take those millions or billions and pour it into answers. Pour it into solutions. But your corporation is not a solution. It is the problem. So it must go away first. We can't bargain with forces of nature, trading slightly less harmful trinkets for a fantasied reprieve. Geophysical processes care not one whit for our politics, our economics, our evening meals, our theologies, our love for our children, our plaintive cries of innocence and error. We can either try to plan the transition, even at this late hour, or the physical forces of the world will do it for us. Indeed, they already are. As Alfred Crosby stated in his remarkable book, Ecological Imperialism, Mother Nature's ministrations are never gentle. And this is a great retort. This is something to say to people who, whenever you bring up a solution or talk about solutions, and, they're like, oh, you want to impose draconian, limiting childbirth rates or limiting people's consumption or limiting people's air travel or limiting people's car travel or limiting people's access to fossil fuels or limiting people's, whatever it might be. They always scream and holler, that's so terrible. How could you force people to do this? Well, Mother Nature is going to force you to do much worse, much, much worse. Those draconian measures are going to seem really kind and nice and very kid glove and very soft and gentle compared to what Mother Nature is about to do to us, which is slam our head into the concrete repeatedly and not give a shit for us while we're screaming and crying. I know that sounds really harsh. I'm sorry. If we climate activists do not tell the truth as we know it, which we have been loath to do because we ourselves are frightened to speak the words, the public will not respond, notwithstanding all our protestations of urgency. And contrary to current mainstream climate activist opinion, contrary to all the pointless focus groups, contrary to the endless speculation on correct framing, the only way to tell the truth is to tell it, all of it, no matter how terrifying it may be. It is offensive and condescending for activists to assume that people can't handle the truth without environmentalists finding a way to make it more palatable. The public is concerned. We vaguely know that something is desperately wrong, and we want to know more so we can try to figure out what to do. The response to an inconvenient truth, as tame as that film was in retrospect, should have made it clear that we want to know the truth. And finally, denial requires a great deal of energy, is emotionally exhausting, fraught with conflict and confusion. Pretending we can save our current way of life derails us and sends us in directions that lead us astray. The sooner we embrace the truth, the sooner we can begin the real work. Let's just tell it. Woo! Every word, every sentence, and every paragraph of this article is bang on to me, in my opinion. After we tell the truth, then what can we do? Is it hopeless? Perhaps, but before we can have the slightest chance of meaningful action, having told the truth, we have to face the climate reality fully and unflinchingly. If we base our planning on false premises, such as the oft-stated stutter that reducing our greenhouse gas emissions will forestall the worst effects of global warming, we can only come up with false solutions that will make us feel better as we tumble toward the end, but will make no ultimate difference whatsoever. Furthermore, we can and must pose the problem without necessarily providing the solutions. Take that back. This is the one sentence I don't like in this article. I read the whole article before, but I forgot about this sentence. Or this part, but whatever. I kind of agree with it. I can't tell you how many climate activists have scolded me. You can't state a problem like that without providing some solutions. Okay, so no, I take it back. That's actually bang on again. So not having a solution doesn't mean you can't pose the problem. You can't state a problem. Anyways, if we accept that the premise, all of the scientific inquiry, as well as many other kinds of problem solving, would come to a screeching halt. The whole point of stating a problem is to clarify questions, confusions, and unknowns so that the problem statement can be mulled, chewed, and clarified to lead to some meaningful answers, even though the answers may seem to be out of reach. I guess, my problem is that we actually state the problem all the time, over and over and over again, and we, only now have people begun to kind of come up with these, really kind of like moonshot answers, and they're and every time somebody comes up with them, everybody's like, oh my god, that's just so crazy. But that's how you start to get the answers. That's how you start to pave the path, is you gotta like just throw it out there. You've got to really have all of the scenarios out there to run, so that you can come up with like, all right, we think that given all of these scenarios and all the possibilities, we think this might be the best course of action. But, we have only taken very tame and timid steps towards, what are the actual solutions up until the last maybe year or two or a couple years. I don't know. I haven't really seen any before that. Other than, carbon tax, have to reduce global, whatever, global fossil fuel burning. But how do you do that? Some of our most important thinking happens while developing the problem statement, and the better the problem statement, the richer our responses. That's why framing the global warming problem as greenhouse gas concentrations has proved to be such a dead end. Here is the problem statement as it It is beginning to unfold for me. We are all part of a struggling to develop this thinking together. We must leave behind 10,000 years of civilization. This may be the hardest collective task we've ever faced. It has given us the intoxicating power to create planetary changes in 200 years that under natural cycles require hundreds or of thousands or millions of years, but none of the wisdom necessary to keep this Pandora's box tightly shut. We have to discover and rediscover other ways of living on Earth. We love our cars, our electricity, our iPods, our theme parks, our bananas, our Nikes, our nukes, but we behave as if we understand nothing of the land and water and air that gives us life. It is past time to think and act differently. If we live at all, we will have to figure out how to live locally and sustainably. Living locally means we are able to get everything we need within walking or animal riding distance. I'm going to include bicycles in there because there's no reason we can't ride bicycles. I'm not saying that we need to build factories to build a lot of bikes. We have billions of bikes in the world already. We have there's bikes everywhere. Just squeeze bikes in there. We may eventually figure out sustainable ways of moving beyond those small circles to bring things home. But our track record isn't good, and we better think it through very carefully. Likewise, any technology has to be locally based, using local resources and accessible tools, renewable and non-toxic. We have much rethinking to do and relearning from our hunter-gatherer forebears who managed to survive for a couple of 100,000 years in ways that we, with our civilized blinders, we can barely imagine or understand. Living sustainably means, and Derek Jensen's elegantly... So I'm going to go back to this thing about living and working locally. I agree with that 99%. We're going to have, if we're going to actually have a solution, it's going to have to be coordinated on a large scale level, which means that if people aren't traveling, they're going to have a way, they're going to have communications. And, I don't see why we can't use existing renewable infrastructure. I'm not talking about nuclear power plants or hydroelectric dams. I'm talking about, small amounts of solar power or whatever to power, internet communication. We can totally do that. If that's the main way that people are maybe like communicating, having meetings, discussing, the World Wide Web could actually be an actual web in which, people don't travel anymore or travel very little. And everybody is just basically connected and doing, whatever they need to do, over the internet. I don't know, there's a lot of energy obviously used in running the internet and, all that entails, but I would opt for having that be our infrastructure, at least while we transition, because we need something. Just everybody if our communication infrastructure goes down and everybody's just kind of doing their own thing in their own little regional areas, we're not going to be able to take care of certain things like deactivating nuclear power plants and other fun stuff, or decommissioning nuclear weapons, et cetera, et cetera. Or, sustaining some kind of, local or national government. Living sustainably means, in Derek Jensen's elegantly simple definition, that whatever we do, we can do it indefinitely. We cannot use up anything more or faster than nature provides. We don't poison the air, water, or soil, and we respect the web of life in which we are an intricate part. We are not separate from nature or above it, or in any way qualified to supervise it. The evidence is ample and overwhelming. All we have to do is be brave enough to look. How do we survive in a world that will probably is already turning for many humans and non-humans alike into a living hell? How do we even grow or gather food or find clean water or stay warm or cool while assaulted by biblical floods, storms, rising seas, droughts, hurricanes, tornadoes, snow, and hail? It is crystal clear that we cannot leave it to the technophiliacs. It is human technology coupled with our inability to comprehend, predict, and prevent unintended consequences that have brought us global catastrophe, culminating in climate disruption in the first place. Desperate hopes notwithstanding, there are no high-tech solutions here, only wishful thinking. The tools that got us into this mess are incapable of getting us out. All that being said, we needn't discard all that we've learned, far from it. We must use our knowledge with great discretion and lock much of it away as so much nuclear weaponry and waste. Time is running very short, but the forgiveness of this little blue orb in the vast lonely universe will continue to astonish and nourish us if we only give it a chance. Our obligation as activists, the first step, the essence, is to part the cultural veil at long last and to tell the truth. I hope you all enjoyed that. Rather long reading, but I thought it necessary, and I thought it educational and hopefully helpful. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.